Good morning. Last week we finished up chapter 14. You should have all turned in your propaganda posters and the investigation pages. They were due today. So make sure you have those turned in. Today we are going to start chapter 15, Boom and Bust. Yes. I have not decided if we're going to do a test of this chapter or not because we have art on Wednesday, so we lose social studies time. So I'm going to see how our week progresses. We're going to see. So we're definitely doing chapter comprehension as we go, since I'm not sure if we are doing a test at the end of the chapter or if we're just doing the comprehension page. Make sure you do complete sentences. So our title this time is Boom and Bust. After World War I ended, we went into the 1920s. Does anybody know what term that decade is called?
The booming 20s.
The roaring 20s. Because things were just going so well for a lot of people. Not for everyone. We're going to find out in this chapter what wasn't so roaring about the 20s. So we're going to find out what was going well in the 20s and where there were some problems.
Isn't that also when the Great Depression takes place?
So here's what happens. Friends, stop with the side conversations and let's listen. These are some good questions. The roaring 20s was a great decade for a lot of people, but not everyone. Then because things had been so high with all this greatness, after you have like a big high, you get big lows. So in 1929 is what you were thinking of, Paul. So it does start at the end of the 1920s. 1929 is when we have the great stock market crash, and that's the start of the Great Depression. So then our chapter, the boom, that's the wonderful, the roaring 20s, and then the bust. That would be the 1930s with the Great Depression and how things were on the flip side. Instead of things being so wonderful, things were pretty awful for a lot of people. So we're going to find out how we were able to pull ourselves out of the Great Depression and what President Franklin Roosevelt did to help get us out of the Depression. We're going to see how specifically it impacted Minnesota and see what Minnesota was going well, what wasn't going well. We're also going to be talking about prohibition. So some of us know what prohibition is. That's goes from the 20s into the 30s. So we're going to talk about that. So let's look at our key terms for the chapter. Our first one is stock. A stock is a share. Oh, goodness. Of course it is not wanting to do that. Let's see if I can get my marker to work. Please reinstall the I don't know if I'm going to get it to work. Let's see.
What?
No, I don't think I'm going to get it to work. So I'm going to have to type it. We'll do things differently today. So a stock is a share of ownership in a company that can be bought and sold. So you can buy stock in companies. So it's that buying and selling of the company's stock. So the stock market is a place where stocks are bought and sold. Now, the stock market isn't like the grocery market where you actually go to the store to buy stuff. There are people, the stock brokers that we go to who actually do the buying and selling. So you go through another person to do the buying and selling of stocks. We still have a stock market now. Gavin, I need you to stop talking. Anna, let's not talk. So the stock market we still have now. There are still pros and cons to it. It was, we'll find out how the stock market played into the economy in the 20s and 30s. So the Great Depression, can you bring that over to Mrs. Gregory, please? The Great Depression is the 1930s economic crisis that began with the stock market crash of 1929. So the stock market crashed. These people had bought into all these stocks and they became worthless. So they had put their money into the stock market thinking they would make a lot of money out of it, and they lost a lot of money. And a lot of people went broke in one day. So they had a lot of money, then they lost it all just in one day, and it was devastating for a lot of people. Andrea.
My mom's company stocks.
Yes. Yep, it's kind of a big deal when a company gets big enough to have stocks and to have stock owners buying and selling. It makes that company a lot more profitable. Sorry about that. This one, did you get? Oh. All right, so Prohibition is the period 1920 to 1933. Who knows what Prohibition is? Tristan?
It was a time from
1920 to 1933, where what happened?
Where the manufacturing, shipping, and consumption were illegal. The manufacturing, transport, and consumption of alcohol were illegal.
So alcohol was illegal. You couldn't buy it, you couldn't sell it, you couldn't transport it. So it was illegal. Why do you think they made alcohol illegal? Why do you think, Adrian?
Because of the effects.
Yeah, because of the effects. Because people drink too much alcohol and bad things can happen. So they called them the teetotalers, were the people who wanted prohibition. They wanted to be dry. When a place is called like a dry campus, it's a dry establishment, it means there's no alcohol on the premises. So they wanted no alcohol because if you think about it, you make bad choices with alcohol. That's when people do a lot of sinning. And so that was all playing a part into it. So they didn't want all these negative things to happen. Prohibition, did it work? Did people become these upstanding citizens and everything was wonderful and people were going to church and making amazing choices?
No.
What happened, Colin?
I think since some people were kind of addicted to it, that they were going stir crazy.
Okay. It wasn't just that people were addicted to it. So the people that still wanted to drink alcohol weren't necessarily alcoholics. There were some, but there were some people that said, don't tell me what to do. If I want to have a drink, I should be able to have a drink. I can be responsible. I can still make good choices. So don't tell me I can't do that. So that's when the underworld became really big. So the mafia and the gangsters, they started this underground selling of alcohol, making alcohol, selling it. There were speakeasies where it was like these clubs that were underground that you could go to without the police knowing that they were operating. So it became this whole big like glamorous underworld where people thought it was super fun to break the law in that way. And that's when crime families like the Gambino crime family,
What?
became very big. So, and you can Google it. You Google a Gambino crime family and it pops up immediately. You're not going to do it right now. But Gambino in Sicily is just as common as Johnson is here, or Anderson.
Wait.
We have several Andersons here in 6th grade. Are you guys related, Sam? Are you and Ashley related? No. So Anderson is a very common name here. Gambino is a very common name in Sicily. So Mr. Gambino claims that his family is not a part of the Gambino crime family. I still do my research and see if any family names turn up. But technically, we're supposedly not related to them. But Carlos Gambino in the early 1900s was the beginnings of the Gambino crime family. And there were 5 big crime families in the United States that Prohibition, they made a lot of money because people still wanted their alcohol. Edward, what did you want to say?
I don't know the name for it, but smoking and gambling were also the big ones. You could do that. Smoking, drinking, and gambling. They were
Yes, because those are sins. It's not good for your body. It's not good for your soul. People get addicted to the smoking, the gambling, and the alcohol. So yeah, those were all kind of lumped together.
Yeah, but they were called something.
No. I know what you're talking about, Edward, but I can't think of the name off the top of my head. We'll have to see if they talk about it in the chapter. Okay. All right, so that is Prohibition. With the stock market crash and people losing their money, foreclosure became very common. Foreclosure is the legal process in which a money lender, such as a bank, takes over ownership of a property because the borrower fails to make payments for the property to the lender. So basically, most families, when they buy a house, you take out a mortgage. Most families don't have enough money to pay off the house all at one shot because it's a lot of money. So you make monthly payments on your mortgage and for however long that loan was taken out for. So if you go broke, you lose your job, you lose all of your savings in the stock market crash, and you don't have any money, you can't make payments on your mortgage. And after so many months of not making payments, the bank's going to say, hey, you're not paying us for this property. We're going to take it over and you have to go live somewhere else. And so you lose your property. It happens to farms, it happens to houses. So think of a farmer. If nobody's buying their food, they can't sell it, they can't make a profit, they can't pay their bills. So then the bank takes over their farm and they get kicked out. Where are they going to go? They don't have a job because what they know is farming. So it just makes things even worse. So we're going to see how foreclosure rates went up, how people were able to, what people had to do to survive. To this day, there are still foreclosures that happen. It's a thing that's an ongoing thing. It is not the problem today that it was back in the 1930s because there's more jobs available. Back then, when the stock market crashed, the jobs went away. Like there were not jobs because businesses closed. So thankfully now we do have a lot of jobs. Depends on the type of job if you're able to make enough money to pay bills. But there is still foreclosure. We have welfare Welfare is aid in the form of money or necessities for people experiencing financial hardship. So the government does help out. They recognize that sometimes things happen out of our control. Your business closes, you can't pay your bills. We're going to help out. So the thought is we're going to have this welfare to help you get back on your feet. So eventually you can hopefully go off of welfare and be back to a contributing member of society. So welfare comes about, especially during the 1930s. A lot of people needed that help from the government. The New Deal is the federal programs developed during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency. Oops. Oh my cursor moved on me. So it's the federal programs developed during Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency to improve the economy and provide public relief. So President Roosevelt, this is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We also had President Theodore Roosevelt, President Teddy Roosevelt, different Roosevelts. So the New Deal is FDR, Franklin Roosevelt's program. So he recognized the bad state that the country was in, that a lot of people were in financial hardship, that it was crisis mode. People had no money, so they had no place to live, no food to eat. And he wanted to turn things around. He wanted to get our country back in the prosperity that we had been having. He wanted to help people get their lives back. So he created the New Deal. And with that, there were a lot of programs that he established to help out the country, to help out people, providing that public relief, providing relief for them. So we're going to be learning about that. So today we are going to start reading our chapter comprehension page, we're going to start reading our chapter and working on our chapter comprehension page. So let's open up our books to page 213.
313?
313. Yeah, that's what I said. 313. No, I didn't. 313. For most Americans and Minnesotans, life changed dramatically from the 1920s to the 1930s. The stories of a young jazz musician and a farm family illustrate the contrast between the jazz age 20s and the Great Depression of the 30s. Learn too about lifestyle changes for women, what happened when the money stopped flowing, and the government's response to the economic crisis. A Minnesotan named Wilbur Fauché, Fauché Tower is still downtown. So you could go to the Fauché Tower. It's named after him. So Wilbur Fauché had always admired the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. For years, he had dreamed of building an office tower modeled after the famous landmark. All he needed was a few $1 million. Where was he going to find that kind of money? So $1 million in today's time is a lot of money. Now think about 100 years ago and how much $1 million was. So think about how you could buy milk for a dime, for 10 cents. You could buy a thing of milk, and now it's several dollars. So $1 million back then was a lot of money. He needed a few $1 million to build this building. In 1916, Fauché borrowed $6,000 and started buying up small companies that sold gas, electricity, and water. He combined these into one large company and then sold stock or shares in the ownership of that company. The shares of stock were bought and sold on the stock market. Investors liked Fauché's ideas. They bought stock, putting millions of dollars into his company. In 1927, Fauché had built a fortune of about $22 million. So he borrowed $6,000 and he turned that into $22 million. In more than enough money to build that skyscraper he had been dreaming about. He decided to construct his office building in downtown Minneapolis. Like I said, Fauché Tower is still in downtown. So if you go downtown, look for it. The people of Minneapolis watched with wonder as Fauché's tower rose higher and higher above the city's skyline. The magnificent structure was 32 stories high, making it the tallest building west of the Mississippi River. No, this was 100 years ago. Things have changed now. Because it seemed to prove that anything was possible, it symbolized people's hope for the future. In August 1929, Fauché held a 3-day celebration to mark the completion of the Fauché Tower. He was, as they say, on top of the world. Unfortunately, Fauché did not stay there for long, because what happened in 1929? The stock market crashes, and that's where he made all of his money. 2 months later, on October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed. Fauché's fortune which was based on the value of his company's stock, disappeared. $22 million. Remember? He had all that money. Now it's gone. Andrea?
Why did it crash?
Let's read and see if we find out. Okay. The money he had received from investors had already been spent on his company. By November, he was broke. So were many of the people who had invested in his company. The stock market crash of 1929 was a turning point from boom to bust in the history of the United States and Minnesota. Before the crash, the economy was booming. Many city dwellers believed that life was good and would only get better. Even farmers who struggled during the 1920s had hoped that better times were ahead. After the crash, everything was different. This bust started an economic crisis that we now call the Great Depression. It swept across the nation and touched lives throughout Minnesota, from cities to small towns to farms. Paul?
Isn't like when the stock market crashes, it's like a fall in the prices of the stock?
Yes. So if you buy stock at the beginning when the company first starts.
Right, I did Leclerc.
Maya. So when the company first starts, you buy stock, it's really cheap because your company isn't big and powerful yet. So you might buy stock for like $1 a share. And then as the company gets bigger and better and more people want it, it's that the more the people want, the higher the price is going to be. So your stock is now worth $20 for that share. So you could sell that stock and make a big profit off of it. So the stocks, when the longer the company's around, the more the stock will cost unless the company starts doing bad. So when the stocks start doing bad, then the prices drop. So you bought stock for $1, now all of a sudden it's only worth a penny. So you can't sell it for the profit. It's that risk that we talked about in several of these chapters when they're buying up property, trying to sell it for more money. You never know if people are going to buy it or not. So when the stock market crashes, people aren't buying stock. So the prices drop. So let's look at that blue box, the crash and the Great Depression. Some Americans in the late 1920s saw the stock market as a way to get rich quickly, like Fauché, $22 million. He got rich pretty quick. They could hardly be blamed for thinking that way. Investors bought shares in a business at a low price, and in a short time, they were worth a lot more. Stock prices were doubling and tripling. The investors could then turn around and sell those same stocks to make a large profit. More and more investors scrambled to buy shares in all sorts of companies without considering the risks. Many people spent all their savings on stocks. Others borrowed money to join the action. So they were borrowing money to help buy stocks because they thought it would help them get rich quick. All that buying and selling of stocks ended with the crash. When people talk about the crash of 1929, they were referring to the sudden fall of stock prices and the panic that fed that collapse. All of a sudden, investors were scrambling to sell their stocks before they lost all their value, but investors couldn't sell if no one wanted to buy. With no buyers, the value of the stock sank lower and lower. So, Andrea, to answer your question, what caused it is all of a sudden everybody had already bought. So they didn't have people buying more and more and more. So then all of a sudden, if people aren't buying, the prices start to go down. And then people got scared. They said, oh my goodness, the prices are going down. We have to sell, 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 sell. And so then people were selling everything, but nobody's buying it. So the prices drop even lower and lower and lower. So everybody wants to sell, but nobody wants to buy now. And so that's the crash that happened, is too many people wanted to sell. Nobody wanted to buy. And so then it caused even more problems with the economy. Colin?
What caused them to not want to buy anymore?
Because so many people had already bought, people had borrowed. So there's only so many people and so much buying that could happen. It kind of reached its limit because everybody was putting all their money into it. Well, there's no more people to put their money into it. So it started to dip down a little bit, and then people got scared. So there's always going to be little dips, and that little dip scared people because the stock market was new. So they got freaked out, and then everybody sold at once. So now when there's that little dip, people say, okay, let's just be calm. Let's be rational. We don't want to make another big crash. So we learned from this crash. So there's still going to be dips in the market, and then there'll be rises. It kind of goes up and down. Okay, that's a natural thing. They didn't realize it was a natural thing, and they got scared. The crash brought on a nationwide economic crisis that we now call the Great Depression. The year before the crash, a slight economic downturn had caused many businesses to lay off workers and cancel orders for new equipment. So that's part of that downsizing, that downward dip. Without the crash, the downturn probably would have corrected itself. Like I said, it goes up and down a little bit, but they didn't realize that. The crash caused people to panic. As more people lost their jobs and were unable to purchase goods, more businesses went bankrupt and had to close. That caused even more people to lose their jobs. So it was this downward spiral they were on. Worried Americans began holding on to their money instead of spending it. The economy kept getting worse. The Great Depression lasted for more than a decade, and it touched all Americans, rich, poor, and in between. There was something called a run on the banks. So people were like, oh my goodness, all of my money is in my bank account. I want to hold on to it so I don't lose it. I don't want the bank to lose my money. So people were running to the bank, withdrawing all their money. But that's not how banks work. Banks, the bank building doesn't keep all of your money there and have this huge vault that has every single person's money in cash in the vault. What they do is they say, okay, you're depositing this money and you need to borrow money, and it becomes more fluid. So when you want to take out your money, you're actually getting the money that's from their big pool of money. So your money, your personal money, might be loaned out to someone else, but it's there for you when you need it, because there's money, but there's not every single person's money. It goes back and forth between people. So these people were going to the bank saying, I want all my money, close my account, give me all of my savings. So they were taking all of the cash out, but no cash was going in. So banks started to not have any money. So banks were collapsing. So it was a huge financial crisis for everyone. And with people not having money, like they said, they couldn't buy anything. And it just spiraled out of control, because then businesses had to close. People had no jobs. They had even less money. So there was less buying, more businesses closing. It was horrible. My grandparents lived during this time. And there's still stories to this day that my dad tells about being raised by his parents. They would save everything because they lived during the Great Depression. They knew what it was like to have nothing and to have everything go away quickly. So they lived very differently than how we live today, because I've never experienced it. I've never experienced what it was like to have money and have it be gone in a snap of the finger. They did. So they had people that lived during the 1920s had a very different lifestyle that they lived. Let's turn the page and let's read that green box. What happens when the money stops flowing? Take a look at the circular flow model. You've seen this in previous chapters, showing how money and resources move within the economy. This time, we'll use the model to help us understand what happens when money doesn't move within an economy. All parts of the circular flow model are connected. When the flow of one part gets interrupted, the other part suffers too. Look at the top half of the model. It shows that households work for Minnesota industries, and those industries pay wages to the households. During the Great Depression, industries laid off employees. When that happened, both arrows slowed down and sometimes stopped flowing altogether. Some households no longer worked for Minnesota industries, and some Minnesota industries no longer paid households. As soon as the top arrows stopped flowing, they affected the bottom arrows. When households no longer had money to pay for goods and services, industries lost their income. As a result, industries are no longer to pay to produce many goods and services to sell. You may be familiar with the words recession and depression. Some economists think of an economic recession as a time when the circular flow slows down, and the depression is a time when the flow between the arrows is seriously interrupted. So they're no longer able to make that money. With that, we are going to stop for today. Make sure you have your questions filled in for the introductory section and the sidebar. For my friends at home, we hope you are well and hope to see you soon.